Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Halls of Horror. I am your host, True Crime Stories, and this evening we're going to talk about one of the most infamous serial killers of all time, Ted Bundy. He was one of the original four that I did a poll on when I first started this stream with Jada the Demon. And he was the runner-up after Dahmer. So, now that I've done quite a few, I might as well get to that last big one before I start going to more off-brand topics or not off-brand, but like different topics of different kinds other than the big serial killers. I'll still do those, don't worry about that. But I like to spread them out so y'all don't get completely just burnt out on that. So, I'm pretty sure everybody here knows who Ted Bundy is. He is one of those, I guess you could say, charismatic enigmas that continue to baffle and get the attention of the media and those who are very fond of the true crime area. Bundy was born in November 1946 in Vermont. Hey Tetra, welcome. It's good to see you, hun. And he basically went through the 70s killing women and doing so by using his charm and his looks. He had some troubles in his life, and why don't we go ahead and start with his childhood before we get to the fun stuff. His full name was Theodore Robert Cowell, with his parents being Eleanor Louise Carroll, and he didn't know who his father was. Apparently that person on the birth certificate is a salesman or Air Force veteran named Lloyd Marshall, but it's not really sure if he's the actual father of him. His mom claimed that that she'd been seduced by old war money veteran Jack Worthington, along with several other men, but ended up raising Bundy with a very violent husband, Samuel Cowell. This is at least something that Bundy has put up, but there's really no evidence to support that his dad was violent and abusive. He lived in Philadelphia for the first year of his life with his maternal grandparents that had raised him as their son so that they didn't have to worry about the social stigma that would come with his mother giving birth out of wedlock. Because remember, at this time, if you had a kid out of wedlock, you would be a pariah, a social pariah, and a lot of people were not fond of that kind of reputation, so they kind of took over that paternal and maternal or parental role for him. Everybody was basically told that his grandparents were his parents and his mother was his older sister. But he did eventually find out about this. And he doesn't really have a solid story as to how he came about the truth. It's the stories have been very varied. For one example, he told his girlfriend, a cousin showed him a copy of his birth certificate after calling him a bastard. That fucking sucks. But he told biographers Stephen MacLeod and Hugh Ainsworth he found the certificate himself. So that's two examples of completely different stories. It's believed, though, by somebody that knows him personally, Ann Rule, a true crime writer, that he didn't find out anything until it was 1969 when he found his birth record in Vermont. He had, and because he was tricked the way he was, he hated his mother. And the fact that he didn't know who his actual father was, left that space in his life and his background that he just couldn't find with the help of his mother. His mother wouldn't give him anything. But he loved his grandparents. He really loved his grandfather the most, it seems. But everybody else would say that his grandfather was extremely bigoted, and he hated blacks, Italians, Catholics, and Jews. He apparently beat his wife and the family dog, and swung neighbors' cats by their tails. Apparently he once threw one of Louise's sisters, one of his daughters, down a flight of stairs for oversleeping. That's kind of creepy. And apparently he talked to himself. Hey, Xylee, glad you could come and say hello. Loved your stream earlier, by the way. Had to go and blast that out on Twitter for everybody so they can come by and say hello. But whenever his parentage was, or paternity was questioned, his grandfather would go freaking batshit crazy. Bundy would describe his grandmother as pretty obedient, like most women are in that time period, where they just wouldn't talk back to their husbands. They were pretty timid. And apparently she had periodic electroconvulsive therapy for her depression, and was so afraid for her life that she didn't leave the house before she passed away. And some of the behavior that was troubling started really early. His Aunt Julia said that she woke up from a nap once and was surrounded by knives from the kitchen, and Bundy was standing by the bed smiling at her. I'm pretty much would be freaked the fuck out if I woke up, there's knives everywhere, and my nephew, or at the time, brother, I guess, is standing over me with a big grin on his face. Like, oh my god, what the fuck? But in 1950, apparently his mother changed her surname to Nelson and took off with Bundy to live with some cousins in Tacoma, Washington. And she met a guy named Johnny Culpepper Bundy, a hospital cook, on a singles night at Tacoma's First Methodist Church, which they ended up getting married for. And Ted Bundy later was his name because he was formerly adopted by Johnny Bundy. He apparently had 4 other sisters, or 4 other siblings after that. And at that point, Ted would, he would distance himself from everyone, even though his parents, especially his adoptive father, tried to incorporate him into everything. He, pretty much, Bundy would say that he didn't like his, adoptive father because he wasn't his real father. He wasn't very bright, and he didn't make much money, so that's... He clearly from the start didn't like him, and sometimes that's the case with adoptive kids. You're not my real dad kind of stuff. He talked about a lot of different things that were disturbing to biographers. Like, when he was young, he would walk around the neighborhood picking through people's trash, because he wanted to find pictures of naked women. He apparently really loved true crime stuff and collected detective magazines, crime novels, true crime documentaries for any kind of story that involved sexual violence. Especially something that showed the dead body in photographs. That's very disturbing, obviously. Why would a kid go rummaging around, like, dumpsters to find naked pictures, number one? And number two, he has a hard-on for anything that's so unbelievably gory and involves forcible sexual intercourse. With the pictures, preferably. That's really bad. And apparently he said that he never ever read fact detective magazines and really hated the thought that anyone really would. He apparently was an alcoholic as well, and he would go through women's windows or go by women's windows and just watch them undress just to see what he could while he was drunk. Even though he had later became that personality type that's very charismatic, friendly, people want to be around him, early on in his social life, he was a loner, just like he was with his family, his adoptive family. He didn't understand how to develop friendships, and that's not surprising if you're a sociopath, which he very clearly is. He's counted as saying, I didn't know what made people want to be friends. I don't know what underlay social interactions. So he really doesn't understand how that stuff goes. But he was apparently well-liked. And pretty... I guess you would say he was a very decent status at his school. And part of that is that he really liked to ski. And I guess he was really good at that as well. I think his first arrest was in high school. And, well, he was arrested twice for burglary and auto theft, which is not surprising. I would assume he was trying to get women's clothing or whatnot. But everything is expunged from his record, so you can't really find out for sure. In 1969, he attended the University of Puget Sound. Puget, P-U-G-E-T. I'm not sure how to say that exactly. And then transferred to the University of Washington to study Chinese, which that's really interesting. He apparently met somebody that he doesn't really give the name of completely in his biographies, that he met romantically, or met in university and had a romantic relationship with. But he really, I guess you could call her Stephanie Brooks because that's what the most common name was that he gave. But it didn't seem like his college days lasted very long because a year later, after he got involved with the girl, he dropped out of college and just decided to go do minimum wage jobs. Along with kind of getting involved with Nelson Rockefeller's presidential campaign. Or getting really, really close with the Republican National Convention, apparently. And he kind of started to drift off at that point. He broke his relationship off with Brooks, because she took off to go with back to her family in California. So he was pretty frustrated about that. And apparently she didn't like that he was so immature and didn't have any ambition, which I could completely understand. If he's just doing minimum wage jobs and completely just cut out of college, I'd probably leave his ass too. What's the point? You're not going anywhere. And psychiatrists would say that this was kind of like the point where everything just kind of shifted, and the rejection from Brooks really hurt Bundy to the core. And he ended up just going to Colorado, and traveling all over Colorado, Arkansas, Philadelphia. He tried to do some more in university work in Temple University, but it seems that didn't work out. He finally found out what his birth paternity was in 1969 when he actually went to Burlington to look at his birth records. And he met somebody named Elizabeth Clofer, who's a divorcee from Ogden, Utah, and worked as a secretary at UW School of Medicine. And apparently they got together and were together past his initial incarceration in 1976. And apparently she kickstarted his desire to do more for himself, gave him some kind of motivation. And in the mid-70s, he re-enrolled back in the University of Washington as a psychology major. He ended up becoming an honors student and was even more liked by his professors and everybody around him, or his peers. In 1971, he took a job at the Seattle Suicide Crisis Hotline Center. Yeah. That's one of those points that people seem to have an issue with, is him being a part of a suicide hotline. Because you would think he would, with his personality that we know now, try to encourage people to do things to themselves that they shouldn't, instead of doing more good. And apparently the people around him didn't see anything that was wrong with his personality. They thought he was kind, solicitous, empathetic. He ended up graduating from University of Washington in 1972 and ended up joining Governor Daniel J. Evans' re-election campaign, kind of posing as a college student and shadowing the opponent, former Governor Albert Rossellini. So he was basically a political mole. And he would just mess with that team all the time and give it back to Evans, and later got him appointed as the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisor Committee, to that committee, or put him in that committee. And he was reelected because of his help, and hired himself as an assistant to the chairman of the Washington State Republican Party, Ross Davis. So you could tell he was extremely involved in politics. And I think maybe it was the power trip thing, because he's been described as being smart, aggressive, and a real believer in the system. So he was very motivated and very much a go-getter, which you need to be with being a politician or helping with politics. In 1973, he somehow passed the LSAT and got accepted into the School of UPS and University of Utah, on the strength of letters of recommendation. So basically, he fucked up on the exam, but because he was well liked by Governor Evans, Chairman Davis, and a lot of his university psychology professors, he got in on those alone. Those were what saved his butt. He went to California in 1973 with the Republican Party and ended up meeting Brooks again, which he started dating. And she was just blown away by how different he was, the complete 180. But the funniest thing that has to do with this, and it makes it more apparent the personality type that he is, he just up and broke up with her, like, for no reason. And when she demanded to know why, this is what he's claimed to have said. "Stephanie, I have no idea what you mean," and just hung up on her. So he just wanted to basically prove to himself that he could have married her. It was kind of like getting that one in and closing a chapter that really bugged him from way back in 1968. He ended up doing the same thing with law school that he did when he first started to go to University of Washington, and just kind of started skipping out on his classes, and eventually he just completely stopped. By April 1974, he was just done. Now, around this time is when his spree started to happen. And there really isn't an exact consensus on where he started his spree or when, because he's told so many different stories, like he's done with almost everything else that he's told anybody that asks the questions. He said that he's confessed to dozens of murders later on, before his execution. He said that he started in 1969 in Ocean City, New Jersey, but didn't kill anybody until 1971 in Seattle. He told a psychologist that he killed 2 women in Atlantic City in 1969 while visiting in Philadelphia. But he kind of hinted and refused to elaborate on a murder he committed in Seattle in 1972, along with another one in 1973, that involved a hitchhiker near Tumwater. It's really believed that he started doing this when he was a teenager, and I could agree with that, with how his behavior was. And this is mostly because of circumstantial evidence with a particular case of an 8-year-old, Anne Marie Burr, that was abducted from Tacoma, Washington, around the time when he was 14, and he was apparently questioned about his involvement in it, and he's like, "No, I didn't do it. It's not me." But I really wouldn't be surprised if he was involved. The earliest ones were documented that are official, that are, concrete, he's been convicted of, is someone committed, actually it was when he was 27 in 1974, which is what he said. He mastered the necessary skills to leave minimal incriminating forensic evidence at crime scenes, especially because that's when forensic evidence started coming out, like DNA profiling. This is the first murder he apparently did was January 4th, 1974, when he entered the basement of 18-year-old Karen Sparks, who was a dancer student at UW. He bludgeoned her senseless with a metal rod from her bed frame, sexually assaulted her, or raped her, with the same rod or a metal speculum that, just doing that alone, he caused extensive internal bleeding to her. And so much to the point where she was unconscious for 10 days and somehow survived. I don't know how that would have happened. Just someone shows up, takes a rod from your bedpost, beats the crap out of you, and then uses it to mess with you. That's... oof. And the next time he did something was in February 1st. He broke into another basement room of a girl named Lydia Ann Healy, who was a graduate at UW and broadcasts morning radio weather reports for skiers. He beat her unconscious, dressed her in blue jeans, a white blouse, and boots, and then just took her. Doesn't say exactly what he did with her. I'm assuming that he, disposed of her like you would as a serial killer. But there's no... It seems there's no real proof on that one. And this seemed to be his MO because female college students kept disappearing one by one through the first half of 1974. Another one was in March 12th with 19-year-old Donna Gail Manson from Evergreen State College in Olympia, 16 miles southwest of Seattle. She apparently left her dorm room to attend a jazz concert on campus, but never showed up. So it's speculated he caught her in the middle of going there and, did what he did. The next is Suzanne Elaine Rancourt on April 17th. Disappeared on her way to her dorm room after evening advisors meeting at Central Washington State College in Ellensburg, which was 110 miles southeast of Seattle. So all these are within the vicinity of Seattle and Washington. So a lot of it will connect. Another 2 women disappeared from Central Washington. I read that wrong. People would come forward and talk about what they saw, particularly about Susan Rancourt's disappearance. And 3 nights earlier, they apparently saw a man wearing an arm sling, which is something that Bundy used to get women into to go with him, making him believe that, he's hurt, he's injured, he needs some help doing certain things, usually moving things. And apparently he was asking her for help carrying a load of books to his brown tan Volkswagen Beetle. That's the infamous Beetle. In May, another disappearance happened with Roberta Kathleen Parks when she disappeared from her Oregon State University dormitory in Corvallis, which is 85 miles south of Portland. She was about to go to have coffee with friends at Memorial Union and didn't show up. There's starting to be a pattern here. Because these girls started disappearing so tightly together in a certain area, it really started to set up red flags for law enforcement. And they were starting to get a pattern of his preferred victim, and they're usually young, attractive white college girls with a particular long hairstyle that's parted down the middle. And that goes back to, I believe it was Brooks, because that's what Brooks looked like, and he was obsessed with her. So he went after girls that were similar in their looks to her as a way of kind of getting back at her. At least that's what's speculated. The next one to disappear was in June. 22-year-old Brenda Carol Ball, after she was leaving the Flame Tavern in Burien, which is near Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. The last time she was seen was in the parking lot with a brown-haired man with his arm in a sling. Where have we heard this before? Another happened 10 days later when Georgianne Hawkins vanished when she was walking a brightly lit alley between her boyfriend's dorm residence and her sorority house. The next morning, they went to go try and find something, some kind of evidence from that area, but didn't find anything. And that particular disappearance went viral, I guess you could say. It was really highly publicized, and people were coming forward saying they saw someone in that alley behind a nearby dormitory on crutches and a leg cast who was struggling to carry a briefcase. One of the witnesses said that the man asked her to help him carry a case to the car, a light brown Volkswagen Beetle. Another trend right here. Bundy would later admit that he lured Hawkins into the car before making her go unconscious with a crowbar that he had in the car already. He'd handcuffed her and drove her to Ithaca? I don't know how to pronounce that shit. Where he ended up strangling her and then spending the night with her body. I'm gonna let you guess what that entailed, but apparently what's really scary about this is before he murdered her, she woke up inside the car and was talking to him. She was saying that she had like a Spanish test the following day and thought he was taking her to her Spanish tutor. A lot of stupid stuff that, like, it's not funny, and it seemed like she couldn't really grasp, from what he was saying, she couldn't really grasp the situation. But apparently he liked her so much that he went and revisited her corpse 3 different times. I will let you guess what he did there. And he apparently also went to the alleyway where he picked her up. The morning after the murder, actually. And was, while the investigation was going on, he found her earrings and shoes and left them in the adjoining parking lot so that he could just get out. He started working in Olympia as assistant director of the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Commission. And he apparently wrote a pamphlet for women on rape prevention. Irony, thy name is Ted Bundy. After that, he worked with Department of Emergency Services that searched for missing women. That's typical. That's a typical thing that serial killers do, where they will get involved with what's going on in the investigation because they just can't help themselves. They are like little kids at a candy store when it comes to this, and it usually is to their detriment. And I think it was that case with Bundy. He apparently met his next love interest, Carol Ann Boone, and 6 years later was back in his life when he was about to go. 6 missing women apparently showed up in prominent newspapers and television all over Washington and Oregon, and it started the panic that somebody was getting hitchhiking young women and picking them up and doing this thing, adding more victims to his list. To the point where women didn't go out at all. Hitchhiking stopped, and a lot of pressure was put on law enforcement to figure out where these girls were. Like most cases like this. but they did end up finding some more similarities between the victims. Like, they were picked up at night, or they disappeared at night, usually near where ongoing construction work is happening, usually within the week of a midterm or finals. Apparently all of the victims were wearing slacks of blue jeans, and most of the crime scenes, there was a sighting of a man with a cast or a sling driving a brown or tan Volkswagen Beetle. It's starting to be a pattern. He's starting to do things that are catching on, and they're finding similarities, which is gonna come back to bite him. He ended up murdering again on July 14th in broad daylight by abducting 2 women from a beach at Lake Samish State Park in Ithaca, which is one of the bigger crimes that he committed that he's known for. 5 of the witnesses described him pretty much in detail, saying he was an attractive young man with a white tennis outfit, with his left arm in a sling, had a slight accent, maybe Canadian or British, and called himself Ted. He asked them for help unloading a sailboat from his tan or bronze-colored Volkswagen Beetle. 4 of those women refused, but one of them went to his car, saw there was no sailboat, and ditched. So, one of them caught on. One of those 5 women caught on to his shit and ran. There were 3 more witnesses that saw him approach 23-year-old Janice Ann Ott, who was a probation caseworker at the Kings County Juvenile Court, with the same story, and she apparently left with him. 4 hours later, another girl, 19-year-old Denise Marie Naslund, who was studying to be a computer programmer, left to go to the restroom but didn't come back. Bundy said that he picked up Ott, and she was still alive when he got back to Naslund, making one watch the other die. So basically he's saying that he took both of the girls around the same time, and he forced one of the other to murder each other with the one or the other watching, which has to be terrifying, and I don't believe, because he later denies it just before his execution. I wouldn't believe a damn word he said. Both of them are gone. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, and that fucking sucks. This kind of, with this description and this particular incident, shit started to hit the fan, and they started throwing out stuff to the media, like what the suspect looked like, what his car was, and posters got spread everywhere. There was newspaper prints, broadcasts in local televisions, and apparently one of his coworkers saw this and was like, oh shit, this is Ted. But because they were the law enforcement was receiving like 200 tips a day, that's a fucking lot to go through. When she went to them, they were like, I doubt it. He's really clean-cut law student. No adult record. There's no way he's the perpetrator. But this hit the fan even more because on the 6th of September, some goose hunters stumbled across the remains of Ott and Naslund near Service Road in Isaac, just 2 miles east of Lake Samish State Park, where they got picked up. But what's weird is that there was an extra femur and several vertebrae that were later found to be George Ann Hawkins. So he went to the same spot to dump them several times. 6 months after that, forestry students from Green River Community College found skulls and mandibles of Healy, Rancourt, Parks, and Ball on Taylor Mountain, which is somewhere he frequently hiked. The only person that didn't have their remains found was Manson, and that's kind of sad. I bet her family didn't like that at all. I wouldn't have liked it either. His stuff started to pick up in Idaho, Utah, and Colorado after that. When he got a second acceptance from University of Utah Law School in Salt Lake City. And he completely left his girlfriend in Seattle, but still kept in contact with her and continued dating a dozen or so other women, which is not surprising. He was known as a womanizer, which makes no sense when he was at first very withdrawn and unable to figure things socially out. And when he was studying in the first year, he kind of got his ego kicked in because, quote unquote, he was devastated to find out the other students had some intellectual capacity he did not. He found classes completely incomprehensive. It was a great disappointment to me. So he really didn't like what was going on, and around this time, there started to be more homicides and disappearances. On September 2nd, he raped and strangled an unidentified hitchhiker in Idaho and disposed of the remains in a nearby river. It's also speculated that he came back the next day to photograph and dismember the corpse of said hitchhiker. A month later, he picked up 16-year-old Nancy Wilcox in Holiday, in Utah, and her remains were found in Capitol Reef National Park, 200 miles south of where she was picked up. Or her remains were said to be buried over there, but weren't found. 16 days later, Melissa Ann Smith, a 17-year-old, the 17-year-old daughter of the police chief of Midvale. Oh, that was a bad move. She just poofed after getting pizza at a local parlor. But her body was found nude in the nearby mountains 9 days later. The autopsy indicated she was probably alive for up to 7 days following her disappearance. So that's a very scary thought, that this girl could have been tortured for several days on end before her torture was finally ended. The end of that month, on the 31st, another 17-year-old disappeared from Leahy after leaving a cafe just after midnight. Her naked body was found by hikers 9 miles southeast in American Fork Canyon on Thanksgiving Day. Well, that's a very appetizing thing to find. Go out on a hike and you find a dead body on Thanksgiving. Wow, I'm really thankful for that. The other connection with those two, with Aim and Smith, is that both were beaten, both were raped, both were sodomized, and were strangled with nylon stockings. And apparently this was like a post-mortem ritual that he had, admitted later on that he had, where he would shampoo their hair and put makeup on them. So he basically tried to make them pretty after they were already dead. That's... I don't like it. I really don't like it. Nope. No, I don't. The next one was in November, when he approached an 18-year-old telephone operator, Carol DeRanch, at a Fashion Place mall in Murray, which was less than a mile from the restaurant he picked Smith out of. He identified himself as Officer Roseland of the Murray Police Department and said that someone attempted to break into her car and asked if he could accompany her to the car or he could accompany her to the station to file a complaint. And when DeRoche pointed out that Bundy that he was driving on a road that did not lead to the police station, he apparently pulled over immediately and tried to handcuff her. But during the struggle, he fastened both cuffs to the same wrist, and she was able to get out. But he tried again later that day with Deborah Jean Kent, who's a 17-year-old student at Vermont High School, 20 miles away north of Murray, from a theater production at the school, so she could go pick up her brother. So that sucks. He messed up, so he gets frustrated and goes to try again. That's kind of freaky to me. And apparently the school drama teacher told the police a stranger had asked each of them to come out to a parking lot to identify a car. Another student said he saw the same guy pacing in the rear of the auditorium, and a drama teacher said that they saw him shortly before the end of the play. So he was scouting that place. Outside the auditorium, they apparently found a handcuff key that was taken from the cuffs Carol DeRoche had on her wrist. In November, Clover finally called the King County Police again when she was reading about the new disappearance in Salt Lake City, and they finally took her seriously. And put her in touch with detectives that were in major crimes that really could get a handle on this situation. And at this point, Bundy was under high suspicion. People were starting to put two and two together to get four, if you will. And really, what made it kind of difficult for them to close that specifically was that one of the witnesses from the Lake Samish abductions failed to identify him in a lineup, which is she called them again in Salt Lake, called the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office and told him to begin, hey, something's going wrong with this guy. I think he's involved. And he was pushed further up the list of suspects. But unfortunately, they really didn't have any forensic evidence to link him yet. The next year, Bundy went back to Seattle after his finals to be with Klopfer. But she never told him that she'd been reporting him to the police at all. She also made plans to visit him in Salt Lake in August, which is very odd, but a good thing on her end. She definitely should not have said anything to him because she might have been next. 1975, his activity started to move from Utah to Colorado. In January of that year, he picked up 23-year-old registered nurse Karen Eileen Campbell while she was walking down a Willett hallway between an elevator and a room in the Wildwood Inn in Snowpass Village. Her body was later found nude on a dirt road just outside the resort. She was budging over the head to death, and there were some weird linear groove depressions in her skull that kind of made it easier to identify whatever weapon was used. Her body also had deep cuts from what looked like a sharp weapon. 2 months later, ski instructor Jolie Cunningham, 26, poofed while walking from her apartment to a dinner date with a friend. So another poof. Um, Bundy later said that he approached her on crutches, which is obviously we've seen as a tactic, and asked her to help him carry some ski boots to the car, where he beat her over the head and handcuffed her, like he does with all the other ones. Did the same thing where he assaulted her, he strangled her, at another site, and dropped her off where she was found. And once again, he apparently liked her so much that he drove 6 hours from Salt Lake City just to revisit her remains. That's very, very troubling that there's 2 so far he really, really liked. And that's kind of sickening in my book. The next to disappear was 25-year-old Denise Lynn Oliverson, who disappeared near the Utah-Colorado border on April 6th while riding her bike to her parents' house. Which her bike and sandals were found later on under a viaduct near a railroad bridge. So he picked up her body and dumped that stuff somewhere else. The worst one was 12-year-old Lynette Dawn Culver, who was lured away, drowned, sexually assaulted in his hotel room. And then he got rid of her body at a river north of Pocatello? I don't know how to say that, but that's gross. That's gross. A 12-year-old, really? Fuck. It's getting more depraved as it goes. I don't know why I'm surprised, but here it is. And around in May, some of his coworkers from the Washington State DES came to visit and stayed for a week in his apartment. Then he spent a week with Clover. And they were talking about getting married in Christmas, but again, Clover didn't tell him that she was in talks with the police in King County and Salt Lake County. He never told anybody of the relationship, or any other romance that he had, at all. The next victim was Susan Curtis, 28, or not 28, disappeared on June 28th, from her campus. And apparently she's the last one that he confessed to recorded. The bodies of Wilcox, Kent, Cunningham, Oliverson, Culver, and Curtis were never found. So he's confessed to these, but he didn't take him to the remains, and they never were able to find him. He was apparently baptized in 1975. I guess because he wanted some kind of redemption. I can't explain why he would do that. But of course he got excommunicated when he was convicted of kidnapping in 1976. And around this time, Washington was still trying to figure out what's going on, and decided that they were gonna bring up a compiling of database. They're gonna make a database out of all the records that they had, and the whole list of everybody that knew the victims, classmates, acquaintances, Volkswagen owners named Ted, known sex offenders, and so on. They queried this for whatever coincidence, and out of thousands of names, 26 turned up 4 lists. One was Ted Bundy. So he showed up on so many lists and was put on the 100 best suspects for this. Which he was literally top of the pile at this point in Utah. Ooh. Unfortunately for him, things started going downhill in August of 1975 because he was arrested in Utah, Granger, Utah, because he was observed cruising in residential area in pre-dawn hours. And as soon as cop went to ask him what was going on, he just booked it, which is obviously very, very suspicious. So he basically took him in, got a hold of the car, and when they started to search the car, they noticed that the front passenger seat was gone and was put in the rear seats area, along with a ski mask, another mask made out of pantyhose, crowbar, handcuffs, trash bags, coil of rope, and an ice pick, and a lot of other items that were basically burglary tools. Bundy would say that it denied everything and said that they were for skiing. The ski masks was for skiing. He found the handcuffs in a dumpster. Oh, that was really smart. And everything was common household items. But really, he fucked up because at this point, detectives put 2 and 2 together to equal 4, and the description of him and his vehicle matched up with everything that Clover was telling them. And when they went to his apartment, he had guides of ski resorts in Colorado and checkmarked the Wildwood Inn, and there was a brochure that advertised the Viewmont High School where Deborah Kent was taken from. Oh, the dots are connecting. They're connecting so well. Apparently they missed a hidden collection of Polaroids of the victims, and he ended up destroying those when he was released, which was dumb on their part, on the police's part. When he was released, he was put on 24-hour surveillance, and detectives from went to Seattle with other detectives to interview Klopfer. And what she told him was pretty damning. She discovered objects she couldn't understand in her house and Bundy's apartment, like crutches, a bag of plaster of Paris that he admittedly stole from a medical supply house, a meat cleaver that was never used for cooking, surgical gloves, oriental knife in a wooden case he kept in his glove compartment, and a sack full of women's clothing, which is very odd. I would be very, very suspicious finding that stuff too. And apparently he was always in debt, and that made her, Clover, suspect that he'd stolen pretty much everything that he had that was of significant value. Like, she confronted him over a new TV and stereo, and he apparently said back, "If you tell anyone, I'll break your fucking neck." Okay. And he apparently got really pissed whenever she thought about cutting her hair, which was long and parted in the middle. Oh no, here's the pattern again. She also said that she'd wake up in the middle of the night, find him under the covers with a flashlight, looking at her body. He kept a lug wrench taped halfway to the handle in the trunk of his car, which was another Volkswagen Beetle, that he borrowed for protection. And apparently they confirmed that he wasn't with her the nights of when a lot of the Pacific Northwest victims vanished, along with the day that Ott and Nussland were abducted. So he didn't have any alibi. She wasn't helping him, which is good, I guess. Seattle police officers ended up interviewing her as well and found out about Stephanie Brooks. I guess in an attempt to get away with something and to kind of dispose of evidence, Bundy sold his Volkswagen to a teenager, which was later impounded and dismantled by FBI techs. When they did that, they found hairs matching Carolyn Campbell's from the stuff that was found in her body, and they were hair strands microscopically indistinguishable from those of Melissa Smith and Carol DeRoche. So they basically found evidence in his car of these 3 women. And it was concluded that the hair strands being in the car with women that never met each other was, quote-unquote, a coincidence of mind-boggling rarity. So basically, he's saying there's a fat chance in hell that this guy isn't the one that murdered these women. He was put in another lineup in October 2nd, and DeRoche immediately identified him. Immediately. And a bunch of witnesses from Bountiful recognized him as well from being at the high school auditorium. They couldn't really get him for Kent, but there was a lot of evidence against him, and he was eventually charged with aggravated kidnapping and attempted criminal assault in the DeRoche case. He got out on bail, $15,000 bail by his parents' payment, and stayed with Clope for most of the time when he was out between the indictment and the trial. Seattle didn't have enough evidence to charge him with a lot of the Pacific Northwest murders, but they continued to surveil him. I mean, that's the best thing they could do. Apparently, Klopfer once wrote, "When Ted and I stepped out on the porch to go somewhere, so many unmarked police cars started up that it sounded like beginning of the Indy 500. That's so obvious. Like, fucking hell. In November, everybody's kind of started getting together and exchanging information, which is always a bad sign for any serial killer. And they really were convinced Bundy was the killer at this point. They were really convinced. But there needed to be more hard evidence to charge him with any of this stuff. In February 1976, he actually stood trial for the kidnapping, and on the advice of his attorney, he waived his right to the jury, and he basically had a 4-day bench trial and a weekend deliberation where the judge found him guilty of kidnapping and assault. He was sentenced to 15 years in Utah State Prison in June that year, or just following that. And I guess he just tried to escape in October because he was found hiding in the bushes in the prison yard carrying a quote-unquote escape kit, which was road maps, airline schedules, and a social security card, which put him in solitary confinement for several weeks, which I would assume he hated. He was later charged with the murder of Campbell and waived extradition proceedings. So he was just transferred to Aspen in January of 1977, which is where he really started making his big escapes. He was transported 40 miles in June 7th, 1977 to Pickman County Courthouse for a preliminary hearing. And this is the first time where he said, "I'm going to serve as my own attorney," which is dumb. And was given the option, or he didn't have to wear handcuffs or leg shackles because of that. And during recess, he asked to visit the courthouse's law library to research the case. And while he was out of view of the guards, he opened a window and jumped out from the second story, fucking up his right ankle, but he got out of a layer of his clothing, I'm assuming the jail colors, or jumpsuit, and took the fuck off to Aspen Mountain. Walking through the roadblocks, essentially, which is really, really odd. He started breaking into cabins to steal food, clothing, and a rifle. And when he left the cabin toward the town of Crested Butte, I don't know how to say that exactly, he got really lost in the forest, and for 2 days he just wandered around. He finally started getting in trouble again when he broke into somebody's trailer in Maroon Lake, taking food, a ski parka, and then continuing southward. And then he worked his way back up to Aspen, trying to get around the roadblocks, because they're obviously going to try and catch him again. He steals a car 3 days after that, by the Aspen golf course, and went back to Aspen in the car, where he got busted. He was weaving in and out of the lane and got pulled over. And that ended his 6-day fugitive run. So he basically was on the right track when he was walking, and then he decides to steal a car and immediately gets picked up. Good job, Bundy. You are a 8D chess player. He continued to disregard any legal advice from his friends or legal advisors, and because the case was deteriorating against him, he decided that he was going to try and get out again, I guess. He got another escape plan and got a hold of a floor plan of the jail somehow, and a hacksaw blade from one of the other inmates. He got $500 in cash that he smuggled in over a 6-month period. And while other prisoners were showering, he shaved a hole 1 square foot between the steel reinforced bars in his cell ceiling, and he ended up just starving himself, losing 35 pounds, which, holy shit, so that he could just get into the crawl space that he made. He made practice runs by exploring the space the weeks later, and a lot of people would say that there was a lot of movement within the ceiling during the night that wasn't investigated. And now at the end of 1977, with his trial coming, he decided he was going to file for a motion for a change of venue to Denver, which was granted in on December 23rd. Instead, he was put in Colorado Springs, which was not good for him, because it was historically a bad place to be for murder suspects. On the 30th, with a lot of the jail, he took advantage of the jail staff being gone on Christmas break, and all the non-violent prisoners on furlough with their families. He decided he was gonna pile books and files in his bed, cover him with a blanket to say that he's sleeping, and then get into the crawl space, and goes to the apartment ceiling for the chief jailer, who was gone, changed into street clothes from the jailer's closet, and walked out the front door. So this guy was smart enough that he waited for a time when everybody was gone, and he knew everybody was gone, so less people are going to be looking, starves himself so that he loses 35 pounds, goes up into this tiny fucking crawl space. It's only like a foot in diameter, so he had to get really dinky, goes to the jailer's house, like little apartment there, and steals his clothes so he could just walk out free and nobody fucking noticed it. How? I don't understand. After that, he decided he was going to steal a car and go to Glenwood Springs, but the car broke down on Interstate 70. So he ended up getting into a passing motorist's car for a ride and then catching a bus to Denver, where he ended up getting on a flight to go to Chicago. The worst part about this is nobody discovered that he was gone until the 31st of December, which was like 17 hours after him leaving. And he was already in Chicago at that point, so they lost him completely. He's gone. Boom, gone. He ends up going to Michigan after that. Steals another car, goes to Atlanta, Georgia, gets on a bus, goes to Tallahassee, Florida, and he ends up getting a room and staying there, and under an alias Chris Hagen, at a Holiday Inn near the FSU campus, Florida State University. He was gonna find employment, and kind of not be a bad boy so he could avoid attention, because he knew that if he was in Florida and he was undetected, he would be alright, and he wouldn't, get police attention, because they probably had no fucking clue what was going on. But unfortunately, he had to abandon the one application he put in for a construction site because he was asked to produce identification. So, because that fucking didn't go well, he ended up going back to shoplifting and stealing credit cards from women's wallets left in shopping carts. So he ends up going back to being a fucking thief. He started up again with his disgusting habits in January 1978, just a week after he showed up in Florida, and decides to get into a sorority house through the rear door with a faulty lock mechanism. Excuse me. And he goes on a fucking spree. At 2:45 in the morning, he bludgeons the crap out of Margaret Bowman with a piece of oak firewood as she slept. Then garroted her with a nylon stocking. He went to the next room of Lisa Levy and beat her unconscious, strangled her. And it got worse. He tore off her nipples, bit deeply into her left buttock, and then sodomized her with the hair mist bottle. Ugh. Gross! He then went to the next room with Katie Kleiner, broke her jaw, lacerated her shoulder, gave her a concussion, broken jaw, made her lose some of her teeth, and then crushed one of her fingers. Apparently, she survived. Her and Kathy Kleiner apparently survived. And I guess that's a good thing, but holy shit, I would not be able to deal with that. And they literally said that they survived because headlights from a vehicle went through their window and made the room brighter, which apparently frightened him away. What's weird, or freaky, I guess, this all happened within 15 minutes. With 30 people in earshot that didn't hear anything. After that, he wasn't done. He broke into a basement apartment 8 blocks away and went after Cheryl Thomas, dislocating her shoulder, fracturing her jaw and skull in 5 places. She unfortunately is left with permanent deafness and equilibrium damage that fucked up her whole career. Um, it's said that he either masturbated or had sexually assaulted her because there was a semen stain on the bed and a pantyhose mask containing 2 hairs, similar to Bundy's in class and characteristic. So he got put there. Not long after that, on February 8th, he went to Jacksonville in a stolen FSU van and approached 14-year-old Leslie Permeter, who is another daughter of a police department. This one in particular, the chief of detectives for Jacksonville Police Department, and said that he was with the fire department. And fortunately for her brother came out, and he just took off. He backtracked to Lake City and went to the high school near there. Or actually, a junior high school. Oh, fuck me. And the following morning, he approached 12-year-old Kimberly Diane Leach. She was on her way to go to homeroom because apparently she had forgotten her purse and a teacher had called her to come get it, but she didn't even show back up to class. Unfortunately, her body was found 7 weeks later, partially mummified in a pig farrowing shed near Suwannee River State Park. She was apparently raped with her underwear found near her body with semen on it, and her neck was just screwed up by a knife, and that's how she died. Which is oh my god, I can't. This just gets worse. On the 12th, he ended up not having enough cash to pay his overdue rent, and he got paranoid that the police were catching on to him. He stole another car, went to Tallahassee, and then 3 days later, stopped in Pensacola, where by the Alabama state line, where he was finally brought into custody again. Holy shit. He tried to get the officer's gun, but that didn't work out, and there ended up being 3 IDs that belonged to female FSU students, 21 credit cards that were stolen, and a stolen television set was found in the car. Apparently there was also a pair of dark-rimmed non-prescription glasses, a pair of plaid slacks that were apparently part of his Richard Burton Fire Department persona, and he was literally just put in jail. Even though he didn't even know Bundy was on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted at this point. And apparently Bundy said at that time, "I wish you had killed me." So he really didn't want to go back to jail. He really didn't want to go back to jail. He was putting in Miami to go trial for the sorority assaults in 1979. And even though he had 5 court-appointed attorneys, he basically said, "Fuck you, I'm going to handle my own defense." And it didn't go well from the beginning because he apparently sabotaged the entire defense effort out of spite, distrust, and grandiose delusion. He was facing murder charges with a possible death sentence, and all that mattered to him, apparently, was that he was being charged. He's just lost his damn mind, and I don't understand why he would do that. He got a pretrial plea bargain, so that if he pled guilty to Levy, Bowman, and Leach, he'd just get 75 years in prison instead of death sentence. But he didn't take that. even though the prospects... He wasn't going to win the trial. It was very obvious he wasn't going to win the trial. But... he thought of it as a I guess, a tactical move, and decided last minute he was going to say no. Fuck you. Even though he was going to be screwed. And it literally, during the trial, bunch of people that were a part of the investigation for the sorority murders showed up and testified that he was there. He was there in the evening, and then he was seen by another witness, leaving the sorority with a clutch. Sorority house, clutching an oak murder weapon. Sorry, I wrote that wrong. There was so much incriminating evidence, it was ridiculous. Impressions of bite mark wounds were forensically matched to him. Which is really dumb on his part. And it took, at the end of it, it took the jury 7 hours to convict him. On July 24th, 1979, he was convicted of the Bowman and Levy murders, along with 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder for Kleiner, Chandler, and Thomas, and 2 counts of burglary, which meant he got the death penalty. Boy, oh boy, I'll bet you he thought, damn, I should have taken that fucking pre-trial deal. Because he fucked himself. His ego fucked himself. He was tried again 6 months later for abducting and murdering Kimberly Leach, which he was found guilty again. Because there was clothing fibers with an unusually manufactured error found in the van that they took on Leach's body, which matched fibers from a jacket Bundy was wearing when he was arrested. But weirdly enough, Bundy thought he was going to get away with things again by taking advantage of a Florida law that said marriage declaration in court in the presence of a judge constituted a legal marriage. So while he was being questioned while he was questioning Carol Ann Boone, who moved to Florida to be near Bundy, he took advantage of the fact that she had feelings for him, took the fact that she was willing to move to be near him, was testifying on his behalf on both trials, and testifying again as a character witness. He decided to ask her to marry him. Which meant that they were married. What a fucking move. What a fucking move in the penalty phase. Completely diverting the topic. Holy shit, the balls on this guy. But unfortunately, February 10th, 1980, he got another death sentence. And was sentenced to death by electrocution. Fun. And he just lost his shit. He was apparently, he stood up and just kept shouting, "Tell the jury they were wrong." He apparently had a daughter, in October 1981, that he really never got any kind of attention, or he didn't get to know her at all. After that, obviously, he was talking up a storm with anybody and everybody that would talk to him. he admitted to a lot of the stuff that he was doing. He confided in a behavioral analyst unit in a special agent with the FBI behavioral analyst unit, saying that he had a deep and almost mythical satisfaction when he murdered somebody. After a while, it wasn't just a crime or of lust or violence. It was possession. They're a part of you, becomes a part of you. And you two are forever one, and the grounds where you kill them or leave them become sacred to you. And you always be drawn back to them. Ooh-wee. Ooh fucking wee. He fucked around and found out in prison. He was found with hacksaw blades that he hid in his cell. He apparently hit a steel bar in one of the cell windows that were sawed off. He was found with an unauthorized mirror in the cell 6 months later after that. Or not 6 months, several months later. And he kept getting moved from cell to cell because of this stuff. It finally ended up getting him a disciplinary action for unauthorized correspondence with another high-profile criminal. And he continued to just talk to anybody and everybody that would, wanted to know what the inside of the mind of a serial killer was. His execution date was briefly stayed and rescheduled for April of 1986. He confessed after that to the Hagmeyer and Nelson he confessed about a bunch of deplorable shit that he did, which included a lot of things that he did to the victims after they died. An example of this is when he revisited the Taylor Mountain and Issaquah site. He would lay with their bodies and perform necrophilic actions until they were, too gross to touch. He apparently would drive hours and just stay there the whole night. He applied makeup to Melissa Smith's face after she died, washed Laura Ames' hair. He basically was trying to make him what he wanted. He ended up decapitating 12 of his victims with a hacksaw. And one of them was apparently in his apartment for a while before he got rid of it. Just before his execution, he had his case thrown up again for a bunch of technicalities, like mental competency to stand trial, erroneous instruction by the judge during the penalty phase, requiring the jury to break a 6-6 tie between life imprisonment and the death penalty that never resolved. And that was pushed back again to November 18. And it kept getting pushed back because another court sentence came, or another court stay came in November 17th. So the stays were happening continually until January 24th, 1989. He'd exhausted, at this point, he exhausted all his appeals, and there was no way he could get out of it, so there was no trying at this point. He confessed to committing all 8 of the Washington and Oregon homicides. He talked about 3 additional unknown victims in Washington and 2 in Oregon that he didn't identify. and never knew their identities anyway. He said he left a fifth corpse, Donna Manson's, on Taylor Mountain, but incinerated her head in Clopfer's fireplace. Which is pretty gross. Not gonna lie. He described what happened with the Issaquah crime scenes. And it was apparently really gross how into talking about that shit he was when he was confessing about it. He admitted to more homicides in Idaho, Utah, and Colorado that were unknown to the police as well. Ooh, excuse me. He admitted to bringing the victims back to his apartment so he could, quote-unquote, reenact scenarios depicted on the covers of detective magazines. That came back to bite everybody in the ass. Talked about where some bodies were buried in the States, but didn't give much information. Again, because he wanted to keep control. After he got to the point where he just wasn't giving any more information, everybody was just saying, get rid of the guy. But the supporters really wanted him to get clemency. Even a young Florida attorney, Diana Weiner, asked the families of several of the Colorado and Utah victims to petition the governor for a postponement to give Bundy time to reveal more info, which was refused, obviously. Boone championed, or I'm guessing that is his first girlfriend, championed his innocence and said that he was deeply betrayed by his admissions that he was in fact guilty. She hated that. And he ended up being put to death in the electric chair January 24th, 1989 at 7:16 a.m. Eastern. And that was it. Now, this whole thing just comes to a big tail. Yeah, he had supporters. He had a fan base. Yeah, he had a really big fan base. Comes to this point of where there's so much information on this, and it's becoming romanticized and publicized, and there's just countless amount of victims that are being found because his DNA profile was added to the FBI DNA database so it could be matched against other crimes. Even as far back as 1986, there were movies being made about him. The first was The Deliberate Strangler. One was Ted Bundy in 2002. The Stranger Beside Me in 2003. The Riverman in 2004. Bundy, an American Icon in 2008. And The Capture of the Green River Killer are just all the movies that have come out for him. But there's a recent one from Netflix that I actually watched, where Zac Efron plays Ted Bundy. Extremely wicked, shockingly evil, and vile. So, I figure I'm gonna show you guys some of that. What do you think? I think that's a good idea. So this is the first trailer that came out for the Zac Efron movie. I'm gonna pause it a lot, so bear with me.
That guy's been staring at you all night.
What do you say we get out of here?
What is it about this guy? When I feel his love, I feel like I'm on top of the world.
Notice this is so romanticized that there's absolutely no way that this could have been legitimate. And this is like from the... Oh, you guys are seeing the photos that I got. But these, like, it's just Hollywood crap again.
There are things you don't know.
Hi, officer. I think I must be lost.
That will shock you beyond your worst nightmare.
I at least like that they say inspired by true events. Because clearly it's not as to the point or true to the story as what I read to you guys. Or what I went over.
I am innocent. You don't actually believe this garbage, do you?
It's in all the papers, Ted.
Monkey! Oh!
I like the fact that they did stick with the parted hair thing. The long brown hair that's parted down the middle. So I'm assuming that that's Clapper. His one wife, I believe.
How did his name get on that suspect list?
I highly doubt that Ted Bundy looked like that. I really highly doubt that he was that chiseled and he looked that good. But I do like the fact that they did enough to cover him with the crowbar and the sling, which is great in a lot of ways. It kind of gets my fangirl going.
I want to come see you.
I was really hoping you'd say that.
This case.
I mean, I wouldn't say he's the most notorious serial killer. I think he's one of the most notorious, but I wouldn't say he's the most notorious serial killer. There's a lot of other ones that are just as bad, just as well known.
Is about catching a monster.
Yeah, that's Sheldon. Yeah, you saw right.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am that innocent suspect.
You are skating on thin ice.
Again, showing him being so blatantly into himself that he thinks he can trick the court and jurors into believing his bullshit. Which it didn't work, obviously.
Nice partner.
Media has convicted Ted before he's had his day in court.
I'm gagged, and you're not.
I wonder whether he did it or not.
That's part touching on what you were asking about, Sheep, where there are young women that are watching these proceedings and they're going, oh my god, he's so handsome, he's so charismatic, there's no way that he actually did any of this. I highly doubt it. He couldn't have. Blah, 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 blah.
I'm more popular than Disney World.
Did you do these things?
Absolutely not.
Ooh. Yeah. I like how it goes. It does like little... It covers enough to where it's close to what actually happened. But, like, the one line where he says, I'm more popular than Disneyland, always made me, like, scoff. Because there's no fucking way you can be that into yourself. But obviously he is, because he's doing his own trial and he failed twice.
Let me get back to plotting my escape here.
If you haven't seen that, I would highly suggest it. Because it is a very good... I would say, representation of that, in my opinion, my honest opinion. There were a number of books that are about this, and there were also television series that went over this stuff, and one in particular was on Netflix that I found to be extremely telling, and that's Conversations with the Killer, the Ted Bundy tapes. I also have this trailer for that. Now, what gets me about this part is that you're actually getting to hear what he says, and you get to... It goes from just looking at something on paper to getting an understanding of who this guy actually is. So I'm gonna go ahead and play this.
He didn't look like anybody's notion of somebody who would tear apart young girls.
Like I said last week, if you are handsome and you are charismatic, you're not usually going to be the type, because you're well-liked, you're not going to be the type that people are going to pick out of everywhere.
My name is Ted Bundy. I've never spoken to anybody about this. I am looking for an opportunity to tell the story as best I can.
In his own words, yeah. Well, he's going to tell the story as best he can, but I think we established that he changes shit often, so you can't really trust anything that he's saying.
A person of this type chooses his victim for a reason. Possession, control, violence.
That was another big proponent of his MO, was that he liked being in control. He liked having power over women, over everything that was concerning his life. He wanted to be God. It's basically what it was. It was that kind of narcissism.
There was something unique about Ted's brain. He talked in terms of a voice in his head, and this voice would start saying things about women.
He had very...
That's interesting. That was interesting to me when I watched this. He speaks in terms of a voice talking in his head. That's a weird way to put that stuff. I don't know how to explain how weird that is.
blue eyes. When he really got going, his eyes went absolutely black.
Murder, leaving a person of this type hungry, unfulfilled, would also leave him with the obviously irrational belief that the next time he did it, he would be fulfilled. And
that makes sense when you think about it. He's looking for this constant craving of being powerful, being in control of everything, and he gets that high for a second, and then it's gone, and he needs to go find it again, like a drug addict, like an alcoholic. It's so patented addiction, but the worst kind, and that's the addiction to murder.
the next time he did it, he would be fulfilled. Or the next time he did it, he would be fulfilled.
Theodore Bundy has escaped, suspected of dozens of sex killings in Washington State, Idaho, Utah, and Colorado.
I think things...
He was everywhere. He was everywhere. And that's one of those sensationalisms that come with this. Or a part of the sensationalism that comes with this. So you gotta think that this was fucking huge at the time. And obviously, with what we're seeing, it definitely was.
Is it gonna work out? That's about all I can say.
Bundy is acting as his own lawyer. What is unusual to see is that many of the onlookers are women.
Are you a little scared when you look at him?
He just doesn't look like the type to kill somebody.
Serial killer
There you go again, sheep. Bunch of young women that are captivated by his looks and his personality. So they're just, how could he? He's just such a great guy. How could he be this monster?
Theodore Bundy has escaped once again. One of the FBI's most wanted men.
He was charming, good-looking, smart. Are you sure you have the right guy?
I mean, I'm not an animal, I'm not.
He's charming, he was smart. Are you sure you have the right guy? Yep. That's what I was just saying.
Crazy, I know, just a personality. I mean, I'm just a normal individual.
I highly doubt that. If you haven't seen that series, I would highly suggest it if it's still on Netflix. I'm not sure. It's been a while since I've watched it. But it was really good. I enjoyed it. And I think the last thing I'm going to share with you guys is some pictures of the crime scenes. And then I'll close things out after that. So... it gets gross. This is graphic. I apologize. Okay, yeah, I kind of apologize, and I don't apologize. Because, I mean... Actually, one of these first photos is a part of my... This photo here is a part of the intro I use for Tales of Terror. Just because it is so fucking insane. Like, here's all the stuff they found in his car. Here's one of the bodies they found. There's blood everywhere, decapitated. I'm not sure if this is the same crime scene, but the saturation of blood is ridiculous. So bad it's in the mattress. Yeah. Here's the Volkswagen, and the inside of it were the seats removed, which would obviously be fucking freaky if you looked into the car and saw that. Here's Ted in a lineup for the Murray PD. He just looks, like, look at the guys, they all look either, like, all look so normal, and then you see this one guy here. And to me, he just sticks out. Here's some more, looks like, the ones off the I-90, hole where some of the bodies were found. Here's some of the skulls that were found in, the parks. Scent dogs, that were looking for Bundy in Aspen when he escaped the first time. Ooh, that's one of the girls that was beaten over the head with Bowman. This is Bowman, who was beaten over the head with the firewood. Here is his teeth and the bite mark. I know that the pictures are not very good, but I mean, you get the gist of it. It looks like this is one of the basements in Florida for the last time he got caught. And lastly, Dead Bundy with the electrocution scars on his head in Florida State Prison. So that is basically the rundown on Bundy. Hopefully that'll give you an idea of how just depraved the guy was and why he was as famous as he was. He is not one of the ones that I found the most interesting when I was first getting into this stuff. I find him kind of interesting, but not completely. But it's definitely a case study that everybody that's a true crime fanatic has to go through. It's one of the ones that you absolutely have to have on your bucket list. And with that, I'm going to close out this Ted Bundy episode. Next week is a very special one for me because it is my birthday stream. I will be going over the favored late 90s, early 2000s spooky storybook, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. The very one that had those really creepy fucking pictures that scared the shit out of you. And I've got some stories on that with my experiences with that. I'll probably read some of the stories, and then afterwards I'm going to watch the movie in my Discord with anybody who wants to come and join for that. So, with that, I'm going to definitely close everything out. Thank everybody for joining. It was great to see you guys, and great to have some people listening. And I will see you guys next Tuesday, or, Halls of Horror is next Tuesday. I will probably see you again in the next gaming stream. So until then, sweet nightmares.